In this video we're going to take a look at how different runners plant their feet and what this means for the use of the hamstrings and the glutes. We'll look at why distance runners of all standards can be vulnerable to tight hamstrings and how they have something to learn from sprints coaches. To get the best contrast, we've actually picked a couple of distance runners who particularly overuse their hamstrings and shown them between two 400-metre runners with much more gluteal actions. They're obviously running at different speeds, 11 or 12 seconds per 100 metres for our 400-metre runners and half that for the distance runners, so that their legs are not always in sync. The first thing we'll look at is how the feet land and the fraction of a second before landing. This ultra slow motion section has slowed down the action 160 times. You can see how the two central runners tend to shoot their feet downwards, resulting in the foot landing with the shin angled forwards. In fact, you get a clear impression that athlete C's hamstrings are having to brake very hard as the leg straightens up. Although the two track athletes are running at twice the speed, they seem to have much better control of their lower legs because the knee is starting to drive back from a much higher angle, catching the shin as it moves forwards. Athlete D was running flat out here and is perhaps slightly overstriding, but the style's still very different to the middle pair. When the foot hits the ground, we can see how the shin of the distance runners is angled forwards, giving a braking action. At the moment of impact, the track athletes have already started to move their feet backwards, but athlete C's foot is still moving forwards, which will give quite a braking jolt as it lands. In fact, there's quite an important difference between athletes B and C. B tends to point his toes downwards and has a clawing action which continues all the way through the stance phase, whereas C is landing heavily on his heels. By contrast, the track runner's feet first touch the ground just ahead of the middle of the foot, with their toes up. If we follow this through to the stance phase and focus on athletes A and B, you get a good impression of how B is using his hamstrings to power the drive, while A is engaging his glutes. The gluteus maximus, or buttock muscle, is the biggest muscle in the body, but is often underused, especially in distance runners. The clawing action, which we see in athlete B, with the weight on the toes, tends to lead to overused and tight hamstrings and calves. In contrast, the vertical shin mid-foot landing of our track athletes prompts the body to co-contract the glutes, getting the best use out of this powerful muscle. So how does all of this come about, and how can we achieve a better running style and fewer injuries? Well, the seeds of the landing are actually sown as the foot leaves the ground. You can see how the 400-metre runners bring their trail knee through much earlier than our distance runners, so that by the time they are mid-stance on the opposite foot, the knee is already ahead of the body. With a high knee lift, this then gives time for the knee to catch the lower leg as it drives down for the next landing. The distance runners, by contrast, are tending to leave their feet behind, sometimes referred to as back kick. With their much lower knee lift, they then end up with the foot being forced downwards as it comes forwards to land. Take time to have a good look at how athlete C leaves his knee and foot behind, and how the foot descends steeply towards the landing. Contrast this with athlete A, who's running at twice the speed, but brings his knees forward much more smartly, with the foot travelling almost horizontally before floating down to the ground. Sprints coaches will be able to give you plenty of drills to get you bringing your knee through earlier, drive it higher and catch the foot before a good landing. It's also worth looking at exercises that activate your glutes before you run. The gluteus maximus is the biggest muscle in your body, but you may be underusing your biggest asset.